Hi everyone, welcome back to the Chronically Questioning podcast. My name is Tiana, and today I am sitting down with Grant O'Rourke. He's another former member of Third Day Worship Center, and he's here to share a story and give us some insight on why he left. And I'm just here to remind everyone to keep the comments positive, be kind to one another in the comments, be respectful of everybody's opinions, and please do not harass the church online, in person, over the phone, nothing like that. We're trying to create a change. And so with that, let's get into the interview. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Chronically Questioning podcast. My name is Tiana, and today we are talking with Grant, and he is another former member of Third Day Worship Center, and he is here to tell his story.
Hello.
Hello, thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So how did you get sucked into the church? How old were you?
So, kind of long story short to get there, is I grew up in a Christian home kind of thing. My family mostly went to Missionary Alliance kind of church.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, and we tried different churches, United, Baptist, went to some Anglican.
Yeah.
We went to a non-denominational church. So we were in Kingston when I was first born, then moved to London, then we moved back to Kingston. Yeah. And when we were in London, we went to a non-denominational church. It was a very community-based church, and the family really liked it. And then we moved back here, went back to the church we used to go to here. And then I was 16 years old, and my youth group that I was attending at the time, they were going to this citywide youth event. And the band that was playing that night was from Third Day Worship Center.
Okay.
And so they were like a rock band. They had, electric guitar, bass, drums. And fun fact, this first night I laid eyes on my wife. Believe it or not. She is 5 years older than me. So I was 16 at the time, but that's the first time I actually saw her. Been crushing ever since, to be honest. But.
Yeah. That's so cute. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And then eventually, I had a friend that was going to that church that was going to the same school as me. And I thought, well, I'll go check it out. My mom and I had been talking about checking it out beforehand anyway.
Yeah.
As we heard things about it, we just weren't sure. And so we went on a Wednesday night, and again, the music was great. And the reason I would like to highlight music is because I love music. I play guitar myself, so that really drew me in there. Another piece in all of this whole journey was that I was really in that phase of my life as a teenager, really trying to take, Christianity seriously. I wanted to test out, what the Bible says, and if what the Bible says is true, and those kinds of things. So I actually had this mantra that I decided, well, if people say that, because people in kind of fundamentalist communities like to say that the Bible's infallible, and it's perfect, and all these things. And so I was like, well, I want to test that out. So I had this mantra of, if the truth, the Bible, is true, then it'll be always proven to be true, right? And so when I went to this church, they took the Bible very seriously. So they said, yeah, miracles and healings are for today. And it talks about, there's events in today's world written about in the Bible. And these things are all connected. I'm like, okay, this is interesting, because it's kind of jiving with my desire to see if the Bible can be taken literally.
Yeah.
Right? So it kind of jived with me at that time. So the music, and then I had this desire to know the truth and to study. And I'm also a bit of a nerd too. So at that time, as a teenager, I was reading stuff about the Bible. I had a concordance. I was looking things up. I was researching, I want to know, right? And so, I found myself at Third Day Worship Center.
So you liked it at first then?
Yeah, because it identified with a lot of the things, the music and that desire to know the truth, and the Bible, or what they would say, God's word. So I really wanted to test those things out.
Was your family there too?
Not immediately at first. It was kind of my place. I started going. My family went to a different church, and they were quite involved in that church for a while.
Yeah.
And so eventually they did come over though.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so they were very involved in the church for a number of years as well.
Okay. Were you involved with any of the ministries? Did you take like the membership course and everything? Yeah.
Of course. So I was available to help in the kids ministry. I helped out in music. I did those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, those were the main areas I focused on.
Yeah.
Also helped out in youth at one point too.
Yeah. Oh, that's fun. So you said that you had noticed your wife at a youth conference. When did you guys start just, talking?
So that was this is quite the long game. So I was 16 when I saw her. So she I guess 5 years old, would be 21 at the time. And so, she obviously didn't notice me at all.
Yeah.
But and I always thought like someone would, she'll be long married before I ever had a chance to be with her.
Yeah.
So anyway, time went on, and this was quite a few years. I guess about 4 or 5 years into going there.
Oh, okay.
I always kind of had that crush on her and kind of thing. But when we went on a missions trip to Florida. Yeah, there was a church down in Florida that was kind of in a kind of a rougher part of Miami-Dade County, I guess.
Oh, okay.
That's where it was. And so they wanted some help reaching out to the young people there, and
okay.
They wanted a band to play too. So I was actually playing bass with them when we went down there, and I also helped out doing kids things because I had a definitely interest in working with kids and helping kids and that kind of thing, because that's what I went to school for. So I went to school as a child and youth worker, and awesome. I finished that. I was just finishing that at the time of this missions trip. And so on the flight back, for some reason, we got seats together.
Oh my
God. And
God.
so I was like, oh my goodness, this is an opportunity of a lifetime.
That's awesome.
We hit it off on the flight. Mm-hmm. And then once we landed, we kept talking, and eventually I got the courage to actually ask her out. And then,
the rest is history.
The rest is history.
Yeah.
Now we're married almost 10 years in January.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh my gosh. Okay. So you hit it off. Eventually you guys got married. And so this was all when you were in Florida for this missions trip, was everything still positive, remote, like mostly?
See, that's where the jumping part in the story is kind of difficult to really give. It's sort of positive in the sense that, I was doing these kind of cool things and all that, but did I have my reservations about things that were preached? Did I have my reservations about the different ideas that were being shared at the church? Definitely did. I definitely did. Mm-hmm. As I said, I like to study the Bible, and I took serious effort into reading apologists about some tough questions. Yeah. And a lot of times, though, when it comes to the real tough questions that they really didn't have a great answer to, they always chalked it up to a religious platitude, whether it's the apologist or people at the church, such as, God's ways are higher than our ways, or he works in mysterious ways, but
it's so cliche. I know exactly what you're talking about. So no one's, Yeah.
And so, and the thing that Third Day really like to hammer in is that the enemy can give you thoughts. The devil.
Kind of thoughts.
So they can give you doubts. So doubt comes from the enemy. Those kinds of questions come from the enemy. And so when you have all that together, you kind of have a choice to make.
Yeah.
Do you really want to risk? Because if you listen to what the enemy's saying, you could be opening yourself up to all sorts of what they call demonic attacks. It could be financial, it could be health, it could be whatever. So do you want to open yourself up to those kinds of things? Or do you just want to just have faith and trust God?
That is the ultimate thought-stopping technique.
Yeah.
Do not just that's of the enemy, but also that's of the enemy, and if you entertain it, then your life's going to fall apart. That is the ultimate thought-stopping technique. Wow. Okay. So you were already having reservations about this kind of stuff. And I want to ask, because you were in child and youth worker and you
Yeah.
had just graduated by the time you had gone to Florida and met your wife and whatnot.
Yep.
Did they have a problem with you going to college?
No, other
Okay.
people seem to have more of an issue with that. I didn't really, and I don't know what that reason was for. I'm not gonna really
Mhm.
speculate on the reason,
Yeah.
but have I seen other people have hard times going back to school and post-secondary school? Absolutely.
So it wasn't
It's
a problem for you.
no, not necessarily, and it might have been just because, like, you know, I don't even want to speculate on that.
Yeah. You
It
just
could be
weren't sure.
yeah.
Okay. Well, that's interesting.
Mhm.
Um, so going back to what I said, the ultimate thought stopping techniques, were there any other things that slowly started to make you question, or was it portrayed to you that maybe I just shouldn't question and just kind of go along with things?
That was kind of where, I parked myself. I passively just not questioned, because what I saw was people that maybe had questions, they either get criticized from the pulpit, that kind of thing, or even people like me, even when people had like missteps, they, and especially if they were people in the church that were kind of considered of influence of some sort, they would
Yeah.
be made to get in front of everyone and share what they did that was wrong. I remember, there was a couple that got in trouble for having sex, but they're not married, and that they had to repent in front of a bunch of people that had no idea what they were doing and what they did.
My
And
gosh.
yeah. And so I'm like, well, that's private between those two people. That was their private moment.
Yeah,
And if they have a conviction about that, that's something that should have been dealt with privately.
that's a
Not
violation.
yeah, it's public shaming, really.
Yeah.
So that bothered me. Um, there's other things such as, like, they had this view, and there's a graphic out there that people might be familiar with, and it kind of has like pictures of umbrellas. So the hierarchy
Oh
kind of
yeah,
goes,
you're talking about.
yes, God, church, husband, wife, child. And so the idea is that you get God's umbrella of protection if you follow this particular order of things. So God's got to be first, right? And obviously, in their mind, that God was first at that church, right? In their mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so the next step was, the husband needed to submit to the church's teaching and the church's way of doing things. And if there was a specific direction from a pastor or whatever, you better be submitting, okay? Or else you're going to be outside of God's protection.
They taught this kind of thing to you?
Oh yeah, it's actually, if people look up the graphic, they would recognize it. The average person that would go to,
Wow.
yeah, for sure. And the wife would have to submit to her husband in that sense.
I hate that. I'm so tired of people telling me that. That is so. I'm not even gonna get into it, but okay.
Misogyny, really. It's a
It
form
is
of,
very misogynistic. It's subjecting women to a lot of things. It opens the doors, in my opinion, to a lot of things to be happening that is not okay.
now they would give the caveat of saying, well, no, you don't want to be abused. So if you're being abused, I mean, that's not okay, right? But then there was also kind of this implied sense of, but if the man was repentant and everything else, you should forgive him, right? There was that implied
Yeah,
sense
that's
to it.
I hate so
And
toxic.
I watched couples that, had gone through some really tough things.
Yeah.
The man wasn't being very
Yeah.
good in life. And I've also watched it in action where, I was with a bunch of youth, and there was this young married couple, and we were at their place, and this wife would share her ideas or opinions, and the husband didn't agree with them, and so he kind of gave her a stare, and
Oh
then she kind of
my
shut
God.
up.
That's awful.
Yeah, and I saw that. I'm like, I don't like that. That does not feel right. That's not okay. Now, did I stand up and say anything? No, I was, at that time I was still, 18, 19. So, like,
Yeah.
I didn't have that voice. I was still very passive, and I gave things up to different again, religious platitudes, and I didn't want to be challenging, and I didn't want to show dissent.
You
Right?
were still a kid.
And you have that submission of authority, right? So if there's a church leader, they're over you, right? So you got to kind of be submissive to that too. So that's where that kind of thing comes into play that really bothered me. Another example of that, this is kind of fast forward a few years later, my wife and I were married, and we had a 2-year-old. I was working shift work. I worked a 10-hour shift that day. It was on a Wednesday. I got home. We lived in Amherst-View. I drove in from Kingston to Amherst-View, and I was exhausted. My spouse just had finished a long day too, she was working, and we made a decision. You know, money was tight for us. We didn't want to spend the extra money on the gas. I said, there's always going to be another church service. We made a decision not to go to the Wednesday night service. Okay. So during when that service started, my spouse gets a text. Where are you?
Who texted her? Do you remember?
This was the worship pastor.
Okay.
So my spouse was a worship leader. And what worship leaders are the people that really, if you're the worship leader for that day, you set the song list. It gets approved by Francis, but you still set the song list. And then you lead the band and where the band's going. So you get to choose where the chorus, if they're going to the chorus or if they're going to a verse or whatever. Okay. So that's your role as a worship leader. And she was under the worship pastor who oversaw all of them. Okay, there's a various number of them.
Okay.
That were there. Okay. And so we made a decision together to stay home. Yeah. And my spouse said this, like, we made this decision. This is the reason why. No, you need to be here. And there was the message of just because, like, you know how that hierarchy, like, you know, I never subscribed to that hierarchy of, you know, the wife needs to submit. It was an equal, decision together. Yeah. That we made. But she said that it doesn't matter if your husband wants to do this or said this, that the ministry's got to take precedent over what your husband says.
Oh.
Okay.
So why weren't they going to you then and challenging you? Why weren't you there, Grant? Why would you tell your wife that? That's interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. They didn't. And I was passive at the time, so I didn't say anything because I wanted to submit to the leaders and all that stuff too. Right. So really during this whole time, all those times of being passive against the LGBTQ community and the preaching and how a lot of members believe that it's a lifestyle choice. When I know in my own education, that it's not,
Yeah.
who they are. So
anyway. Thank you for saying that. That makes my heart happy. I mean, I know that because I am one of those people, but it's refreshing to hear that, especially because you come from an informed background. You're educated.
Yeah, well, yeah. And I mean, that's truth. I was a seeker of truth, right? Yeah. So then so I found that to be true. Yeah. So that was something I had, but did I feel like I could say anything about it? No. And at my young age,
oh, no.
Well, maybe I can create change from the inside, kind of thing. So I maybe had that kind of idea in my head, which was kind of silly because that's not how things really work, at least when that kind of environment. So I was really betraying my own feelings, my own thoughts, right? And betraying my own body in those moments. And that's something that even now, like, I have to forgive myself for. Mm-hmm. And I feel like a lot of people who have attended there, I think that's something that they possibly could be struggling with too, where you didn't listen to those checks. You heard things that didn't sit right with you, but you just chose to submit.
Because you were taught to. And when you're in that environment, groupthink is a very, very powerful thing.
It definitely is. It's so powerful. In the sense that you live in fear and you get this sense of that you cannot live without this place. You cannot live a safe and healthy life without this place.
They make you dependent almost, would you say? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And when I was going, like at the height of my time going there, I was there at least 5 times a week. So you had the twice on Sunday, you had the Wednesday night, you had the youth young adults night on Friday, and you had prayer on Saturday. And then when they had conferences, well, goodness, sometimes conferences started Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then went to Sunday, right? So there's always something. It was very busy. It kept you busy. It became your life.
And that's not healthy.
It really isn't, because you don't have time for that self-care. Like, you wanted self-care that Wednesday night. We were tired. But then there was that demand that you needed to be there.
So what happened after that?
There was a bit of like, I wouldn't call it a falling out, but there was that. I was really frustrated by it, but I was afraid to say anything about it.
Yeah.
And so, my spouse and I didn't like that experience. I'm gonna back up a tiny bit though.
Okay.
So when my daughter was born, my spouse also had preeclampsia. And for those who are not familiar, it's a pregnancy disease. It raises your blood pressure. It's really what it is the placenta is toxic to the woman's body, the mother's body. And so she had HELLP syndrome and everything else, and she had complications after. And even after those complications, they took a long time for her to recover. So the general expectation for worship leaders at that church was to really, you could maybe take about 3 months hiatus when you had a baby. All right, so when 3 months came up, this worship pastor told my spouse that she needs to, she would like her to decide to have the main focus of worship leading the youth. And like the youth groups, they had, so at that time this youth group had different teams, and there was a specific worship team under this thing where they would youth group, and they would write songs and create songs and all this kind of stuff.
Okay.
And my spouse decided that no, it's not something she can do right now. She wasn't healthy. She still was recovering from that experience. And newborns too, right? So all those things going on, and this worship pastor had the gall to say that she's a disappointment to her.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Wow.
So now flash forward to that Wednesday night. That was kind of the context of where things were coming from, right? So later, we have her second child. Mm-hmm. My spouse was fine. She didn't have any complications herself. My son developed a cow's milk protein allergy and a soy allergy, which required him to be on special formula to live, really.
Yeah.
But the hospital was good to us. They found as many free samples as they could give to us. But the special formula cost over $700 a month. Oh
my gosh.
So, and we were tithers at the time. So, to explain what tithing is, I'm sure.
Can you explain that to people?
Sure, but to explain that what it is there's this expectation, if you're a member of this particular church, and other churches do have this practice too, is you need to give 10% of your gross income to be a member. And the reason, there's a benefit for that. It creates what they call an open heaven over you. They talk about a Bible verse in Malachi, or that you'd be given blessing. But if you don't give your tithe, you'll be under a curse.
Can I just say one thing before you go forward? I have never given 10% of my income to my church. Yes, I donate. Yes, I give money. Absolutely. But my life is still quite blessed. Mm-hmm. So,
well, yes, it
is something it's an Old Testament thing, yes?
Yeah, and like the idea was in the Old Testament, that you would give like grain and different kind of things like that to the temple for those that maybe needed it. At one point it was for the Levites who were ministers in the temple.
Okay.
They did jobs. So that was the real purpose of it. Now it's become about money, right, in our context.
I was going to say, because a lot of people donate their time if they don't have the finances, and I think that's totally acceptable.
Well, so do I.
Like I would always help. I mean, before COVID, I love working with kids anyways, but I'd love to help out in the mornings. And I donate when I can to like the Easter egg hunt. I mean, of course now there's nothing to do, but like at the time, because I was still a student and nobody ever pressured me. So you felt pressured and it was mandated to be a member. You had to.
And they talk about it every service. Every time the offering is taken up, tithes and offerings are taken up, it's talked about how you need to give and different reasons why you need to give, et cetera, et cetera.
So
but
it's jammed into your head.
It was right in your head.
Always there.
You had a doubt about it. Well, you can open it to attack the enemy. If you don't do it, you open yourself to attack the enemy. And you don't want attacks of the enemy. Those are scary.
Yeah.
You don't want to possibly go to hell. That's scary, right? And that's kind of the thought process. And when you did question, well, God's ways are higher than yours. He works in mysterious ways. It might not make sense. It might not make sense to give 10% of your gross income when you can't make your bills at the end of the month.
So they were
have faith
to pay 10%. And how much was your son's special formula?
Over $700 a month. So our tithe at that point was maybe about half or 2/3 of that. So I had no choice.
Yeah.
I can't give that money to them. I need to keep my son alive.
That's a valid choice.
And that's what I decided.
Yeah.
Obviously, right? As any good parent would.
Yes.
And so we ended up having a meeting with the church counselor there, and she talked about, she mentioned that, it's not something that they can help us out with financially. But she also said, you got to do what you got to do if you're not tithing right now. So we told her we weren't. But you should get right back on that as soon as you can.
Are they not making, what year was this?
It was 2015.
So at this point, they were making either $1 million a year, because I've seen those, or close to. They've been making upwards of 1.5 million since at least 2018, and they couldn't help you with your son's thing, or
no.
That's interesting. That's all I'm going to say. So
I stopped tithing.
Good for you.
I had more progressive views too at that point. I was pro-LGBTQ at this point. I didn't love the cognitive dissonance, or you had to love, love the sinner, hate the sin kind of thing. I hated that, man.
I say love the believer, hate the belief.
Yeah, right.
Too kindly to that.
It's disingenuous. It's not truly caring about people. And I hated it. I'm an honest person. I like to be authentic with the people who I am, or who I'm with, sorry. And those are, that's what matters to me. And so we stopped tithing. And guess what? We were able to afford it. We figured out a way to afford our stuff. It was hard. Mm-hmm. Stop tithing didn't give us all the money we needed. We got help from some family members. And he got better.
Good.
My son got better. So did things get worse for us? No. Were we under a curse? No. Was able to buy a house a year and a half after that? Yeah.
So nothing, you can't remember any, no, nothing. If anything, things looked up from there when you stopped tithing at that time.
We had more financial flexibility. We're able to make our ends meet better.
Good.
It didn't get worse for us. Now, was there a small period of time when I was still attending where maybe I felt like someone could use a little extra money towards a certain little orphanage or whatever? Yeah, I might have given $20 here and there. But
you gave what you could.
No.
Good.
No.
And nothing bad happened.
No.
Okay. So was that the big?
I kind of objectively, through my own experience, found out that that's not true.
Yeah.
Right. I'm a seeker of truth.
Yeah.
If truth is truth, and there'll always be seen to be true, well, then that's not true.
Yeah.
And so that experience allowed me to start asking the questions I actually had. Some of the tough questions. I would see things preached from the pulpit that, they wouldn't be great. They wouldn't be quoting the Bible very accurately at all. I remember one time in particular, this is when I first started speaking out, not that anyone heard me.
Yeah.
at the front or whatever. I was sitting near the back, like people around me, and I embarrassed my spouse. But I said, he said, so they're very much into this futuristic theology. So a lot of world events are connected to this end times thing that's going to happen, right? And so at the time there was an earthquake somewhere. And so he said, see, that there's going to be more and more earthquakes. I'm like, hold up. We're both looking at the same version of the Bible here. New King James, what they like to read out of. And it says there'll be earthquakes in various places. It doesn't say anything about more and more.
It just says various places.
Right? So, and so I started questioning that whole belief system. Like, okay, like we keep attaching different world events to, well, this is what it says in the Bible about it.
COVID is the end of the world.
Didn't you say it was about this other thing? Didn't you say it was about 9/11? Didn't you say, like, even microchipped? Did you say that was about credit cards way back in the 80s? Not necessarily third day, but people that believe in that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And so I did some research on that, and I learned when that belief first came out, 1830, and the guy who's credited with that belief is John Nelson Darby.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and it didn't take on in the States right away when he came over here and started sharing it. He's I believe he's famous for the Nelson Darby study Bible. I could be wrong on that. So,
okay.
But anyway, but he's also famous for that. So anyway, that eventually that belief did take off when there's the Great Wars happened and the Depression, because it has the idea that the world's going to get worse and worse.
The world gets worse and then it gets better. The world gets worse and then it gets better.
Well, right, and generally right now, like, we do know that the world is generally getting better. Do we have lots of work to do? Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
As mankind, humankind, I should say. There's lots of work to do. But is extreme poverty getting better? Yes. Are people living longer? Yes. Are people able to access more healthcare? Yes. Is infant mortality rate going down? Yes. Right? So those are all good things.
This is going to be a super positive uplift for people listening to this, because all we hear in the news is doom and gloom, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But see, the danger with that futuristic rapture doctrine kind of thing, because they believe eventually at some point, whether they have three different things. They have the pre-tribulation, during the tribulation, and post-tribulation. So they believe that there's going to be 7 years of terrible persecution of people on earth. So
just people or Christians?
So it depends. So if you're a pre-tribulation rapture believer, you're actually missing the tribulation.
Oh.
Okay. So you get raptured out into the sky, and you're safe from this rise of an antichrist figure, is what they call it.
Okay.
Okay. Mid-trib, you have to endure a little bit.
Okay.
Okay. And post-tribulation, you have to endure it all too. So there's three kind of schools of thought within that doctrine and theology.
Where in the Bible does it say this?
It doesn't actually say the word rapture in the Bible at all. What they do is they use things called proof texts. There's talking about, I believe it's either 1st or 2nd Timothy, it talks about how they be caught up in the sky. And then Revelation chapter 4, verse 1 talks about come up here. So then they take that to mean, that means that people are going to be.
So the Left Behind and Thief in the Night type things are not like, if a theologian was having this discussion with us, what do you think they'd say? They'd say, well
this version of theology is one of the most indefensible versions of theology. It's very weak. It can be pulled apart very easily. And I found it, and as soon as I was able to ask questions, it was one of the first things to go. Now the modern day version is based, I believe also it's based off of a book. I think his name's Hal Lindsey, The Late Great Planet Earth. Okay. And he based it off the creation of Israel as a nation or a state. I want to be more respectful there. But in 1948, there's specific scriptures that talk about how in 1948 and this generation no longer will not pass away until all these things come to pass. So what they're really trying to say is when Israel became a nation, it's going to take 40 years.
Okay.
And in that 40 years, which would have made it 1988, Jesus is going to return and be the rapture and everything else. The Bible network in the States even had things called rapture practice, and people would jump on trampolines to practice to be ready for the rapture back then. Oh yeah, it was a nutty time. And there's a book released called 88 Reasons Why Jesus Was Returning. And when he didn't return in 88, there was 89 reasons he's returning in 89.
You know what is so interesting about these revelations, and I listened to this on Clint Haycock's, you're familiar with the Mind Shift podcast.
Yeah.
He just discussed it because of all the prophecies about Trump winning, what that actually does to the congregation, which is so disturbing. And I'm like, how? Maybe you know why. It makes them buckle down even more and stay even more like in that mindset.
With prophecy in these kind of circles, in these fundamentals, especially charismatic Pentecostal circles, is that they believe that all prophecy given today is conditional on people being obedient.
So, can you explain that?
So
this was a belief.
Basically, you've got a personal prophetic word of, God's going to do something in your life or whatever. You got to be obedient to God's call in your life. You got to do the things to get there.
Okay.
Trump thing. Maybe people did not vote for Trump that should have, right? So there's all these things.
There's always an escape clause.
The enemy, right? Another enemy, right? So you point all these fingers in all these directions of why these things didn't happen. I'm like, or you're just wrong.
Yeah, they're never held accountable. They're never held accountable. There's always an escape clause. Yeah. Always an escape clause. Yeah. And it drives me nuts. Did you see that kind of stuff? Like people were going, I know when I spoke with Tara, it was like they were doing everything possible to be the best Christian. And it's still, the reason why you're not being blessed is because you're not good enough. Is that kind of how you felt?
Or you need to press in harder. You need to have a more deeper prayer life. You need to worship harder. You need to, they like to jump around at the front of the church. They call it praise. You need to do that harder. It's they like to say, it's your faith, you're not saved by your works, but really, if you want to get anywhere, in their mind, you got to do some works to get there, right? So it creates this, again, another cognitive dissonance where you're holding two competing ideas where, yes, I'm accepted by Jesus, but then, oh, well, you're not accepted enough.
Yeah.
You're not, there's something not aligned properly in your life. And if you're for sure in the exam your life every way, then it's happening because it's just attack of the enemy because you're doing something right.
So you were familiar with all of this stuff. You're questioning all of this. Mm-hmm. What was the moment that made you finally put your foot down and go, you know what, enough's enough, we're getting out? So
it was kind of a slow burn for me.
Yeah.
So I had enough on the inside, right? There's a certain level of cost to it. Like my family attended, that kind of thing. And there was a social circle there. But I couldn't handle the misogynistic things we talked about, the submission stuff, that dangerous stuff. There was a moment where, I was helping it with preteens, and one of the co-leaders with me said that, we know that Francis hears from God. And so that's why we need to listen to him. And I'm like, you're telling 10 to 12-year-olds this?
Is that not idol worship? You're not supposed to worship your pastor. You can appreciate them.
Wow. This is what the divine order was there.
Oh, okay.
Right. So that was huge alarm bell. Like even with my education background, right? I knew those things were not healthy. And by the time I left, I was working on my degree as well, online, part-time. And so you know, I was just learning more about human nature and how, like, even things like, I didn't like the idea of, you know, how people are considered born sinners.
I don't
And,
do that either.
you know, and yeah, born sinners. Oh goodness, what, you know, you're not worthy of God's grace. You know,
It's so not true.
but you create this mantra, almost a negative self-critic on the inside that tells you and repeats these things into you, right? Or anything you do that's good or that's the strength of yours, you can't just accept it. That's the strength of yours and have that pride in yourself because that's pride. No, you got to give glory to God. God gave it to me. God did this. God did. I didn't like any of that. I was totally against with what I knew human beings needed.
Yeah.
And from what I learned too, right? Like, you know, to believe that your heart is wicked and deceitful is toxic. And you begin to, and so what I've learned in this whole experience was I was betraying my own body at that time too, because I wouldn't listen to those things that I knew, like, I would listen to it, but I wouldn't act on it. I would passively set it aside because of different fears or all those things, right? Mm-hmm. If you listen to your doubts, you open yourself to the enemy. But yeah, as I stopped tithing and realized I wasn't under a curse, I was fine.
Yeah.
I didn't like the inconsistency in the preaching, how where I said he talked about earthquakes in those places.
Yeah.
I said, no, it's not. And they kept saying different things, like, that's not what it says. Yeah. And other people that went to Bible school there, you know, they would say different things or didn't have a really good, strong grasp of what the Bible was saying. School. Yeah, Bible school, non-accredited Bible school that really is just how Francis thinks, right? So
it wasn't clicking anymore.
It didn't click any longer, and I subscribed to things totally different. At that time when I was leaving in 2015 into 16, I considered myself more of a progressive Christian.
That's how I am. It's healthy.
Yeah. And then, yeah. And so, but as I left, I had more questions, and I continued to ask those questions. So those are things that really, you know, then I eventually became agnostic, and now I'm an atheist. I would consider myself an atheist. But even in the leaving, that was hard. You know, my spouse, she was talking to Francis about what I was going through, and he said, don't buck your knees, don't give in, because she's like wondering, should she leave with me, or what should she do about me? We're just going to leave for him to stay here. But eventually it came to this point where she chose to leave with me altogether, because I had stopped going by the end of that summer of that year. Yeah. I just said, enough is enough. I can't. I'm embarrassed to be even associated with this place. And I've been embarrassed for a very long time. For me to even come out and talk about this, I've had some growth and some inner healing.
When I talk to people and they say these things, I always remember to say, your mind was not your own.
It wasn't.
If you had known what they were going to be teaching and how you were going to feel and what you were going to be coerced to do and persuaded to do, you would have said no. What happened to you and what happened to your mind and your thoughts and your behaviors and your feelings about yourself was not consensual. It was non-consensual, and it wasn't your fault. And I can give you a million books about groups like this.
No, yeah.
That will back it up. Yeah. And you know this too, because you're educated as well.
Yeah, I've taken my time to learn about.
Listening, it's not your fault.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You know, but when Jen, my spouse Jen is her name, decided to leave, it was a nasty message back. Is this God? You guys found each other here, but how's this God? And it was just, yeah. And this is the last message I'll be sending you, is how he signed off on it.
And how long were you in that church?
Altogether? For me, I was 11 years. My spouse was 15.
And just like that, there was no keep in touch, no, nothing.
And that was particularly devastating for my spouse too. Yeah. Because that was her family. She considered her family. And she has her own story that's for her to share.
Yeah.
But, you know, that was her family. And of course, we popped on their live stream shortly after, and we caught him saying things like, "Don't look around and see who's not here anymore." But you don't want to, like, essentially saying you don't want to be like them, or you don't want to listen to them, or be associated with them.
Did people who were still in the congregation still talk to you?
Not really. Like, some do, like, and some have started again.
Good.
But some do. They're so sorry, some did, and like it stopped. Like it was, so it's, that whole thing was real rough. But what helped me through it all was learning about how, things about religious trauma. I learned about how these high demand groups function and what they do.
Yep.
And why I felt the way I felt. And then I was able to dive in even more, to ask even more questions about my faith. And I'm not here to tell anyone, you need to become an atheist or whatever. If you have your faith and it's working and it's healthy, have at it.
Exactly.
But for me, it's not for me.
For you.
No, it's just not. And if people do want some good resources, someone who's fantastic to read, because a lot of the scholarly, like religious scholar work, is behind paywalls and databases that you have to cost all this money and whatever. And they can be hard to understand because they're written in these high level papers. But someone who does a really great job is Bart Ehrman, who's written multiple books. So it's Bart Ehrman, EHRMAN.
Okay. What's his subject?
So he's a New Testament scholar. He teaches in the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And you can YouTube him too. He has a lot of lectures and debates on there too. But he does a great job. He covers all sorts of things. Talks about what did Jesus really say, is one of the book subjects. How did Jesus become God? It talks about the history of heaven and hell. And different things like that, that you might maybe be interested in learning about, right? So for me, one of the first things after the end times stuff that left for me was the doctrine of hell and learning about where that came from. And I no longer believe in that.
I can't believe in something like that because I see people who have the cards stacked against them. And that science tells us when you put a child who has a genetic predisposition to becoming psychopathic or with conduct disorder and things like this in an abusive situation, I don't know the actual stats, but they're going to become that. How can God put someone in that position just to send them to hell? I can't believe in something like that. I don't know if what I believe is right, and I'm okay with that. Mm-hmm. And that's how I approach. I'm a little bit more universal, Unitarian Universalist. But I agree with you in the fact that it doesn't seem right when you think about stuff like that.
No, and from my education background, I learned that, people really are products of their environment. And those who are hurting their kids, they're likely hurt themselves, right? That cycle of abuse and the cycle of poverty too, on top of that. And so when you learn about those things and you flip your focus from people being wicked and deceitful and born sinners into people that are born to be loved and that do desire to do well and want to be loved, because that's a basic human need. We know, like, there's a book by Bruce Perry that highlights this. I believe it's called Born for Love, and or Made for Love, one of the two titles. But anyway, you probably get it in Google, I'm sure you'll find it. It talks about the orphans in Romania.
Okay.
And orphans in Romania, they were in these rooms. There's so many of them, because I believe the reason for it was they had an anti-abortion law, so then all these kids are being, orphaned. Yep. Right. But I could be wrong on that fact. But my main point in this was they were kind of left just on their own, and these babies did not thrive because people were not holding them, not being there,
Yep.
not loving them. And humans need that to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
Humans need the space to be human, have meltdowns. You don't need to be seen as, oh, you're a terrible sinner or this bad thing, and then we need to get it out of you somehow. We need to punch it out of you.
There's a demon in you when you're depressed. That's my favorite.
Yeah, right? No, people need other people. We need to look after each other and look and support each other and build community with each other, not us and them, not, they're sinners, we're not, or there's so much you could look into that. But people really are products of their environment.
Yeah.
So if you imagine, a lot of places, high demand places, do get a lot of people that had some abusive backgrounds, and these are vulnerable people. So when you have these hierarchies of authority, such as a place at Third Day or whatever, as I explained earlier, and you have these messages of you're a sinner, your heart's wicked and deceitful, your doubts are of the enemy, and don't trust your thoughts.
Yeah.
That is almost re-traumatizing people.
Yeah.
So maybe they went through physical emotional abuse as a child. And now having these messages and have these people coming into, you need to submit and you need to listen to what I say, your disappointment or whatever it is, that is re-traumatizing people. And that's not healthy. It's not okay. It hurts. And that's where we get into religious trauma syndrome. So there's people that maybe didn't have abuse as a child, but when you're going there and you learn not to trust your own body, your own thoughts, your intuition, what you know is right.
Yeah.
When you're being told not to trust those, you're betraying your body, and your body is designed, is built up. We evolved as humans to, the body is designed to protect us. It has learned how to protect us. It gives us feelings and emotions and all those things to help us survive. Those are good things to help us survive. But places like Third Day, and they're not the only one, tell you not to deny your flesh, deny yourself, not listen to those things.
It's so toxic.
It's very
wrong.
And so when you go to leave, because that becomes all your life, it can be hard to make relationships with people because you don't know how to interact properly.
You were kept in such a secluded community, first of all. You were also kept from developing properly in outside world.
People can get developmental arrests through this place, right? Where you're not allowed to, if you're told your emotions are bad, well, then you don't know how to grieve things properly. You don't know that it's okay to cry sometimes. And you don't know how to release anger properly either, right? So that can be tough. But is there hope in all of that? Absolutely, right? So, oftentimes I've heard people say they had encounters with different leadership there as a very, as like a fight, flight, or freeze response. So, so, I've heard people talk about they would freeze, not know what to say or do when they were being lambasted about whatever.
Yeah.
And so that's a trauma response. Your body is in survival mode in that moment, trying to just like, whoa, what's going on here, right? And so when you've experienced those things outside of that, because maybe you have something that you might see as an authority figure or whatever, and you feel that again, well, that's where that kind of thing comes from. So it comes one two ways. So maybe it happened in your childhood. Specifically, it does happen in your childhood. You can then, those authority figures like your parents or caregivers, they can then be put onto these authority figures in the church, right? From people. Or if your first experience with that kind of toxicity happens in the church, then you can have similar responses out in the community.
Yeah.
Right. If you're not able to have that moment to recognize what it is, find that healing, because you can find healing from it. It takes work. Your brain can rewire neural pathways so that you can get better, but it does take work and it takes time to recognize it. It's a real difficult spot people get into.
And Another phenomenon that is noted in the literature that I've read is some people leave an environment like Third Day and will just go to another environment that is similar, just a different place, because they don't know what a healthy religious or, even secular environment is. They don't know. They think that's normal. So like you said, you have to listen to the signals your body's giving you.
Yeah. And sometimes that gets so clouded by events that happen and different maybe perhaps religious platitudes or fears.
Yeah.
And so that can be quite the process. And if it's something that somebody struggles with, and you're listening to this right now, whether you went to Third Day or you went to a different church that did similar things, it's okay to go get therapy. It's okay to go talk to someone about that. Those are okay things.
Yeah.
Look after yourself, find that healing, because there is hope there. Definitely is. It's not right what happened to you, and I think places like this should be held accountable. Absolutely. And I'm right with you, and I'm here right by your side, figuratively speaking, but I'm speaking right now too about it. Like, I'm with you, and I support you, and I believe you, and I hear you.
And well, myself and your wife, who hopefully will be on next week if she has the time, we started a Religious Trauma Survivors of Canada page. That's it. I'm usually used to using the acronym. And there, although we're trying to work with people in the community, I have one woman who is also Christian. She is a licensed, I think she's a counselor. I haven't spoken to her in a while. Who is willing to partner with us to help get people some counseling if they're leaving environments like this. Because she's Christian, so she gets it, and she's also educated.
Which is a huge thing, right?
Yeah.
You want someone that's educated and qualified to practice those things. Specifically, like if it's psychotherapy, people need to be specifically registered in a regulatory college to be able to have that too. And oftentimes churches don't have people like that are their counselors. And they're protected because it's under the guise of religious counsel. Which
that's open up the can of worms of telling people like Nicole Perry not to seek help for anxiety and depression, or going off your anxiety and depression meds.
Yeah, for sure. And see, that was another red flag for me, hearing stories like that. I knew very well that medication is very important. If you need the medication, you take the medication. But you also get the support you need for it too.
Yeah, you can't just
reading a book and having faith. It takes trained professionals to help you.
Yeah.
It just does.
So if people are listening to this, would it be safe to say that they could also reach out to you for advice if they felt like it?
I don't mind sharing resources or talking or being a safe place for people, for sure. People need a safe place to be able just to talk and maybe hash out questions they have.
Yeah.
And that's okay. So if you want to reach out, absolutely, I'd be happy to talk to you. I'd be happy to listen.
Yeah.
I don't have availability all the time, but I'll get to you when I can get to you too.
Yeah, we're very busy.
I got 2 kids and life, and so it's not something I'll do 24/7, but it's something that
you're a resource.
I can be a resource. I can put you to other resources out there that can be really useful in coming out of places like this.
Amazing. And also try and check out who is the other woman, Dr. Marlene. She's someone who specialized. She coined the term religious trauma syndrome.
That's right.
And I put stuff all the time on Religious Trauma Survivors of Canada. put her, lectures and whatnot, because she's so on the ball with this. She gets it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people don't get it.
No, and see, that's the things that she talks about. So she wrote the book called Leaving the Fold, and it's quite the book. We have it here at our house. It has some little worksheets to work on too in the back, which I think is really good to do because it helps you really break down and see things. But she talks, I've heard her talk about this before, and it's, in the world of counseling, and that's something I know as well, is, counselor's not about telling people to leave their faith or whatever, right? Like, we respect people and their faith and what they want to believe, and that's absolutely, like, but if you're someone that's wanting help because of your experiences of these places, they're, a lot of counselors are not necessarily, not a lot, but there are counselors that are not necessarily comfortable in doing that. So when you are looking for a counselor, it's good to find one that kind of understands where that's coming from and that they would be comfortable too. So when I say go get help, go talk to somebody about these things, do your research on the counselor too and ask them questions before you decide to enter that therapeutic relationship with them too.
Amazing. Do you have anything else to say before we peace out?
Nothing on top of my head at this current moment, other than I just want to reiterate the message of, first of all, if you've experienced, any kind of religious trauma, if you experienced any of those real terrible things that might have happened to you, and it doesn't have to be at Third Day. Like, I don't want to just harp on them necessarily, because I know there's lots of churches across North America that operate exactly like this.
Yep.
You're not alone, number one. Number two, there is hope. You can be free of these things that maybe plague you. And if you have questions, do not be afraid to ask the questions. Ask tough questions. If your God's not big enough to handle questions, is he worth your time to worship? And just consider that. Okay, that's really all I have to say there.
Thank you so much for coming on and educating everyone.
Sure. I really enjoyed the time. Yeah.
I hope you have a good night. Thank you for watching or listening. Next week is going to be, hopefully, that'll be probably the last one before I take a break for the holidays. But I want to thank you again and for your message. It takes guts. It really does. And I'm glad that you came forward, because people need to hear the educated perspective and someone who also lived it. So thank you so much again. And
you're welcome.
Like, subscribe, share, try and get it out to as many people as we can, because we just want to create a change. Be nice, don't harass the church, and we'll see you next week. Bye.